Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi Dorian, it's great to have you here. Thanks for coming on and joining us today.
Hi Lisa, how are you doing? Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you here. For people who don't know you, Dorian, do you want to tell people a little bit about you and who you are?
Sure, yes. So my name's Dorian Payne. I'm based in South Wales and I'm the co-founder of a company called Castell Group. And we're effectively a property development company that specialises in collaborating with private investors to develop and deliver high quality, social, affordable and disabled homes for those who truly need them.
Okay, brilliant. So how did you get into that? Because that's quite a big thing to be doing now, isn't it? So
yeah, it is. Yeah. So I mean, it's a funny one. There's obviously Steve Jobs says you can only when you look back you can connect the dots, and really to get from where I am now, it wasn't really that intentional to get where I am. It's just my journey has kind of taken me here, if that makes sense.
yeah.
If you want, I can just start back from the beginning quickly, just to get people where I am, because I know the listeners want to hear more important things about socializing rather than just myself. But
I think it's important to understand who you are. Absolutely.
Definitely, yeah. So I was born into a family of property investors in a nutshell. My dad's a builder, and he still is actually, and my mum was a stay-at-home mum, and they were involved in buying properties, refurbishing them, refinancing them, and keeping them. And even back then, they had social housing tenants, or tenants that were receiving housing benefit. And when I really wanted to be involved in property since I can remember. So I asked my mum if I could help her manage the rental side. So when I was in school, I was helping my mum, and that's when I had my first exposure to working with like local authorities and tenants in receipt of benefits, and some with disabilities as well. So I was exposed really young about it, but it didn't really, I'll be honest, I didn't actually think I was going to, specialize in affordable and social housing type of thing. I was just going with it. I just wanted to learn more so. And over the years then, as I just become immersed in property. I wanted to know everything and anything about it. So I set up a letting agency when I was 16 as I left school. And I scaled it into an estate agency, into a finance brokerage. I become a qualified accountant because I wanted to learn how to actually run a business successfully. And I sold that business then, the property one, to a local competitor, and started working with private investors and doing my own projects, which started small, just single flips, buy, refurbish, refinance. Then I moved into commercial conversions, and then into where I am now, new build. But I was doing that mainly with a view for private housing. And what kind of happened, and just be honest about it, is that I was doing developments for private housing, and I had a slight scare in terms of, I did a deal. I was working with an investor, and I couldn't sell. The finished development at the end, and we sold it in the end. But it really opened my eyes to remind me of the fact that if property goes wrong, you can lose everything. Effectively, you really can. And it just reminded me that I was working with a risk appetite that I wasn't actually comfortable with, and I didn't realize until the risk materialized, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, yeah.
So I was working in an area where it was too risky for me, and I didn't really even think about the risk. So anyway, after that, I revisited my business plan and really asked myself, what do I want to do, and how do I get there effectively, and how do I get there safely? And I thought more about building a conservative business, and still that one that could benefit society. And I mean, you can do that in social housing as well as open market, because there is genuinely, we live in an age at the moment where there's just genuinely a shortfall of housing all around. More so though as well, that social and affordable, because a lot of developers at the moment, it's starting to change, but a lot of developers believe it's there's some stigma still attached to it, and that they're just avoiding it because they think it's a headache rather than an opportunity, effectively. So I looked at it, and I come across the business model with a project manager who's now my business partner, and he was a project manager for housing associations. And I asked him to tell me more about the kind of industry, and then I took my experience from it, because he's very much construction, and I'm very much sort of financial and commercial, if that makes sense. And I asked him if he wanted to come on board, and I realized it could be an opportunity to grow a large, scalable and sustainable business. And that, here we are today, really. Fast forward to today.
That's really interesting. And I what you say is, I think, really, really valid to a lot of people, particularly at the moment. I think where people were quite comfortable with that risk, suddenly with everything that 2020 has thrown at us, people are reassessing risk a little bit more carefully, aren't they, I think?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And as much as I'd like, I really do now that I'm involved in the industry. I love what I do, really do. It's such a good feeling to deliver homes that are for those who truly need them. But when I first started, it wasn't really about that as such, and just being honest about it. It was more so, how do I de-risk? How do I de-risk, and how do I make sure if things go wrong, I'm going to be safeguarded, and that's what we've done.
So I think perhaps it would be useful for you to explain why it is, from your perspective, why it is a de-risk strategy, because some people won't understand what it is that you do and how that works.
Definitely. So just to remind the fact, so we specialize in, building to sell. That's predominantly what we do. So we go and find the land, we take it through planning, we'll build it, and then we'll sell it. And that's what we did as private developers. That's what we do now still as social and affordable developers. So as you can see, a big risk for us is if we wasn't able to sell our developments at the end. Now, I know a lot of your audience are going to be portfolio builders, or they're going to have properties, and the risk might be slightly different in that even if it doesn't work for social housing, there's still a demand for open market. But for us, it's all about, as people listening to this, as business owners, effectively, it's all about identifying your own risks within your own area and within your own business. And then is about working out how to build a business around safeguarding those risks. For us, like I said, the biggest risk is we couldn't sell. If that happened, we'd be in a whole world of fire. So to get around that, we needed to effectively forward sell to remove our exit risk. And when we started working with housing associations or registered social landlords, kind of interchangeable words really, then we realized that they would agree in advance the sale price or their acquisition price, and we would enter into a contract with them. So we effectively forward sold, and our exit risk was reduced to mitigated.
So right from the beginning, when you started development, you started with this exit in mind, and you will have this all lined up, so you know exactly what you're selling, who you're selling to, how much you're getting for it right from the beginning. Is that right, Dorian?
Yes. So the process for us works, if you could imagine this. So we'll find a site, and then we will go and do a very quick initial appraisal on it and get a feasibility kind of design done. But effectively, how many homes can we fit on the site, and what mix will they be? Apartments, houses, so. And then we'll go and take that to a local registered social landlord, and we will ask them if they're interested in it, and we'll ask them if they're happy with the mix, if they've got good demand, and how they can, are they thinking more on what the tenure will be. So there's obviously social housing, but also affordable housing and disabled housing. There's quite, and different subsections within each. So once we understand the mix and the tenure, we can, and as long as they've confirmed demand, we can then move forward to discussing figures. Because if it falls down at that stage, remember, you can do this stage without actually acquiring a site, so you don't actually lose any money. It's just a little bit of time. But once they've confirmed that, that's already de-risked it, so we can start really pushing forward on the site. We'll agree financials with the housing association at that point. Again, quite high level indicative, because they've still got to give you their specification, etc. But once we've got that agreed and they can confirm they will fund it and there's grant support, or they're going to be funding it internally, we can enter into like a heads of terms with them, and we can really push forward with the site. So we start the process before we even secure a site, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because last thing you want to do is secure a site that no one wants.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, where you're looking at, at the moment, property's flying, isn't it? For people, big developers, sites are just being sold out very quickly. But, in other times, maybe more uncertain times, potentially having that guaranteed exit, you're not presumably having to come up with a show home in that time. You're not having to come up with all of the costs incurred with that. And a lot of developers will budget quite a big chunk of their budget, won't they, to allow for a delay in sales.
Definitely, yeah, 100%. And it's more with development, it's such a slow game in terms of, you can look at a site today and not be on site for another 18 months in the future. And then you've got another 12, 18 months build. So every time you look at a development site, you're looking at not necessarily will it sell well today, because like you said, the market is quite hot at the moment. It's more so, where are we going to be in 2 or 3 years? And if anybody knew that, really, then they'll become billionaires, wouldn't they? But the moral of the story is we don't know. And then that comes down to, okay, if we don't know, then what's the worst case scenario here? Let's stress it. And you can stress every deal to make it not work, of course, the Armageddon stressing. But if you just stress it realistically, you will very quickly understand where your risk threshold is, and if you're comfortable, and not only that, are you liquid enough to absorb the loss if it goes wrong. In this industry, not many people talk about the losses enough, or the risks enough. Property can be very lucrative and it can be life-changing, but it can also be life-changing in the wrong way. And really, all you need to do is just be honest and risk. Everybody wants a deal and everybody wants to make money. Nobody wants to lose money, but and neither do I. But we live in the real world.
Absolutely. And so what you're saying makes perfect sense, really, about this strategy. And so presumably, for you to get into it and make those connections and stuff with the housing associations, how was that? That must have been quite a challenge at times.
Yeah, so the biggest thing to remember when you're dealing with housing associations, even local authorities as well, they're heavily involved in sectors, more so now today, because they're able to borrow and build themselves, and other providers, is that it's slower. In private housing, it's yourself as the developer that makes decisions. And if you're a small developer, i.e. it's just yourself or a small team, effectively, if you are the managing director and you can make decisions, then you can move as fast as you want to move, really. You're limited a little by planning, but ultimately, which is still a local authority. But if you treat that as the same, if you want to go down the housing association route, the biggest thing, and the thing I had to come over is oh God, it's so slow. It really
and it can be so frustrating, can't it? I think particularly for property investors who are used, like you say, to doing things quite whizzily, quite fast, making those decisions, and then having to move at that kind of almost snail pace. Yeah, it
really is. And it's the snail pace, and then there's it's the bureaucracy, it's the red tape. It's how they have some. And don't get me wrong, every provider is slightly different. They have internal procedures that are slightly different. But some that you'll deal with, the slightest changes or discussions needs to go up a chain of command and come back down to you. It's like you're dealing with Microsoft sometimes, and you're trying to get a message through to Bill Gates. It's.
It's a good analogy, and it's true. And I think for a lot of people coming into social housing, supported housing, that's a real challenge for them to get their heads around, is that things do take a lot longer. The long-term gains are there, and it's worth persevering with it. But yeah, that's definitely an important lesson.
Yeah, and the one way to safeguard that is obviously pipeline, right? If you get enough in the pipeline, over time, you won't feel the strain so much on the delays. So for example, us right now, we have 15 developments in the pipeline at different stages. And we still feel it, because we need to be on track, but it's nowhere near as much as when you've got if you've got one site and you're waiting on a response, then you're going to be pulling your hair out. I'm lucky I've let mine grow, but
the lockdown look.
But also the catch-22 is you can't build a pipeline until you've done one, really, because you need to understand the process. You can learn the process from a theoretical point of view, but when you work through it yourself, that's where real confidence comes. And when you start having discussions and building relationships, that's you can't beat that. So you've got to budget in that this is a medium-term play at least. And from the time it takes you to get it through, and then you can be confident enough to build a pipeline. And it just comes back down to the point, really, don't rush. There's no need to rush, really. There is a demand. There has been a demand for several years. The way in which we're building properties and homes says there's going to be a demand for at least another, decade plus. So there's no need to rush as such. And that was the biggest thing I had to get out of my head. I wanted everything yesterday, as typical private developers do.
Absolutely. And so working with housing associations, appreciate what you're saying about needing to be appreciate that things take longer and there's high levels of bureaucracy to wade through. Anything else you would say about working with them? Any other tips or advice?
Yeah, so even though I've just discussed about understanding the time pressures and trying not to rush and work with the process, that doesn't mean not to be proactive. They completely do different things. I literally talk about a game of tennis within my business, even though I don't play tennis. It's just the only thing that comes to my mind and is stuck. Effectively, every time something comes to us, we've got to serve, and we're always waiting for the other party to serve back to us. But if the ball's ever in our court, you don't want it. If you wait too long, you'll lose a point. Effectively, you want to hit it back straight away and wait for them to come back to you. And that's what it is. Proactiveness is all about being on the ball yourself, and you can speed up the process by being proactive, if that makes sense. So the tips I would give about working with housing associations is, firstly, there's no need to be worried about it as such. The best advice I was ever given, and I can't remember where it came from now, but I remember, I've done various different talks and other events where I've been in front of lots of people, and one of the biggest tips I was ever given is, whoever you're dealing with is just people, if that makes sense. So when you're speaking to a housing association, you're not speaking to an RSL that has hundreds of millions of pounds of assets and you're a bother to their time or anything like that. It's more about who the other person on the end of the phone, it's just another person. They've got a job to do. How can you help them do their job better? And just try not to worry about it, if that makes sense. So yeah, be proactive. Don't worry about speaking with them. Just speak to them. Tell them exactly what you do, how you look to help. And if they're not nice to you, well, there'll always be another person to speak to. So those are the biggest barriers I ever find, is when they're never sure to make the first step. They always, they don't want to pick up the phone and just speak to them or reach out to them. But that's the biggest thing. Once you do that and start speaking to them, you'll realize there's nothing really to be worried to stop you to hold you back. It's just relationships.
It's people, isn't it? And it's communicating with people. And I think also realizing, particularly in local authorities, a lot of people are doing like 3 jobs, aren't they, at the moment? Everyone's really stretched,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
So an element of understanding that, you might be frustrated by that bureaucracy, but actually that person's trying to do 100 other things at the same time. Your project isn't necessarily at the top of their pile.
And that's where we've got a little bit of a USP down here, because we recognize that as well. So we focus on what's called off the shelf or turnkey development. So we effectively do the vast majority of what. So in the kind of housing association development team, some HAs are geared up as proper developers in terms of they've got a land finding section. They've got people who appraise them, negotiate. They've got people who deal with pre-construction planning and reporting and all that sort of stuff, and then people overseeing the construction side of things. So the person you're dealing with, like a development manager, for example, will have lots of different sites on at once, and they will have to deal, like, getting a site to construction phase. There is so much work involved in it that people really they underestimate it unless they've been through it, in terms of to get on site. It's really a lot you have to do. So what we did is effectively say, well, we'll just do it all for you, if that makes sense. So we have geared our team in a way where we, like I said, as a private developer would, we will take the site from conception all the way through to completion with very minimal input or effort from the housing association, but it will be built to their specification, their standards, and they will have the opportunity to monitor it as well every month. And they'll be given monthly detailed reports to make sure everything's on track. They don't have to do hardly anything. And because of that, it's been really well received. And yeah, we've touched wood. We've managed to grow quite fast because of it. And that's what they're looking for. They're just human. They've got a job. They've got 5 things to do. They're only getting paid for 1. If you can come along and take 1 job off them and they still achieve their goals, then that's just a win-win, if you ask me.
Absolutely. And that's obviously why you've got so much in the pipeline of people. You're making life easier for people, which is what everyone wants, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, quite a lot of the properties some of the properties on every site that you develop are physically disabled, accessible, aren't they?
That's right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and about how that design happens?
Yeah, sure. So the design standards in Wales and England are slightly different, but the moral of the story really is disabled housing is meant to be for those that not just have physical disabilities, it's other disabilities as well. It's meant to be built for those who, again, truly need them, and it's designed in a way that will benefit them. So when we build disabled homes, they normally have a list of suitable tenants or even bespoke, in terms of they want to build or design specifically for a certain family or an individual or a couple. and we're very much led by that. But it could be things like wider accesses, ramps in and out, hoists to help them in and out of bed and the bathrooms, adjustable kitchens, stuff like that. So risers, different points of where the plug sockets are, so they can access them higher, for example, if they're in a wheelchair. So there's lots of different things that can be done, and it's very much got design. And that's why I like about it is that every person with a disability handles it slightly differently, and they have slightly different needs. Some need carers as well, so obviously put extra bedrooms in, or some even have families. And the best thing is that they can't just go into a house, for example, and have without spending significant and readjusting the house to make it work for them. So the best thing is they get a new property that's built for them effectively, and they can stay there, forever until the time comes where they need to move on. But and that's the best thing about it. So yeah, it's much more geared towards what does the person need. There's basic standards, which England have as well as Wales. But on top of that, it's what does the person need. And if you're looking to do disabled homes, then that is one question you need to ask the RSL or the housing association you're working with is, do you have any specific standards or requirements that need to go in here for the people you have in mind? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So yours tend to be very much, this is this individual, we're designing this home for this individual, and this is the spec that we need to create. Is that?
So that can happen, but behind that there's a standard disability standard design, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a standard of which you're meant to design to. So in any social housing down here needs to be designed to something called development quality requirements, DQR, and we also need to design something. Have you heard of the Roundtree
Trust?
Yeah. That's it. So lifetime homes, effectively. Yeah. So lifetime homes needs to be designed to as well, and also Royal National Institute of the Blind, RNIB.
Mm-hmm.
So we design and also secure by design as well. So we design to those standards as a default, and then we have discussions about, what type of tenants are they looking to put in, and then we make adjustments, bespoke adjustments. And it's easier to do with new build because we can do it in the design stage. Harder with conversions, of course.
It is, but you can still, there's simple things you can do, I think, when you're doing any refurbishment, just to have that in mind and think about how, not everyone is physically fully able when, who's going to be renting your properties, even as a private landlord. And actually there is massive demand, isn't there, for adapted properties for people with...
Definitely. And the worst, it's like if you're building a property specifically for like a wheelchair user, for example, we don't have any wall units then in the kitchen because there's no need for wall units. Effectively.
You mean the high wall units?
High wall units, yeah, high wall units. That, as 2 meters in the air, stuff like that is quite a risk hazard then. But it's all about, again, it comes back down to relationships and communication. That is literally the secret in all of this, is the more you can build better relationships and communicate better and get them involved at an early stage, the easier it'll be all around. I've seen developers build social housing, and then when it only then starts speaking to RSLs when it's done, and then it's not being built to any of specification it's meant to. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's the same if you're doing supported housing. To have those conversations about what do you need to be done really early on, so you get it right from the beginning. Otherwise, you're pulling out your brand new sockets to bring them higher up the wall or whatever it is that you need to do. Yeah,
definitely, 100%.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Any other tips or advice you would say for property investors who are looking at getting into this space, who are thinking about working with housing associations or developing properties for this market?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is from two different fronts, really. So the more knowledge you can get, the more accurate your decision is going to be, or the better decisions you're going to make, if that makes sense. So, and you can really obtain knowledge by listening to obviously podcasts like this, but as you can already guess, it's all about like I said, different RSLs or housing providers have slightly different criteria, the way they like to do things. So it's about having conversations, building relationships, finding out exactly what they're looking for, what they need, what their demand is. And if you can facilitate and work with that and provide what they need, you're well on your way, really. That's the biggest thing. So it's all about building relationships, being confident and comfortable in what you're doing. And whilst you're building those relationships and learning about social and affordable housing, don't forget that this is a property related business, and you need to still, ensure that you know also what you're doing from a property perspective. So that's it, really. In terms of how to get started, it's have conversations, build relationships, communicate, and it's also about getting good at finding good deals, really, that work. I know that's very, very vague and broad, but the better you can get at finding those sites or houses or opportunities for the housing associations, I mean, that if you find a good opportunity, and it's happened with us, if you find a good opportunity that matches the criteria of RSLs and what they're looking for, then there's kind of not many, there is still hurdles, but they will work with you so much to help you get it over the line. And that's the thing to remember. They have targets and goals. They're out there to make a difference and provide housing. If you find out exactly what they're trying to achieve, and you can help do that, they will work with you and they will help you knock down those barriers effectively to help contribute towards the overall housing shortage dilemma we're in.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Dorian. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.